Is sex a parable to the relation between Christ and the church? Does this have significance for the spiritual connection between a husband and wife? I'll say yes, sex is a parable when it comes to the relationship between Christ and the church, but sex is also enjoyable and pleasurable and fun. It goes beyond the subject of parabolic teaching. All human relationships are parabolic teachings, of course they are. But they go beyond that. Human relationships, and I'm not trying to entrap myself on the subject of whether or not we're going to marry or be given in marriage in eternity, but human relationships will continue through eternity. And they serve not only as a parabolic reminder of our relationship to God, which is a means to an end, but they're also an end in and of themselves. That bond between two people is an end in and of itself, and a pleasurable end in and of itself. So, intimacy, yes, it's a parable between the relationship between a human being and Christ, but it is also a means, which is a means to an end, but it's also an end in and of itself. Just the act of coming together with a human being and binding yourself with that person, if that's all there was to marriage, and it didn't teach us anything about God, if there was no God and that's what we did and we experienced it, if you could argue that we we just evolved into this race that we were with everything intact and there was no God, it would be an end in and of itself, that it's healing and healthy and enjoyable and necessary, all of those things. It is all of those things, but it's also teaching us so much about who and what God is in our relationship with Him. So that was a good question. Is it going to be wise to get married in the time of trouble? In time of Jacob's trouble and onwards. So I don't know if the person's referring to our time of trouble, because this time of trouble that we are now in never ends. There are 4 times of trouble, there are 4 Sunday laws, there are 4 dispensations for each of those 3 groups, and they all are sequential, one after the other. So Jacob's time of trouble has already started for the priests, and it goes to the Levites and Nethinims, and then the 144,000. I assume that this person is talking about Daniel 12:1, that time of trouble. And is it going to be wise to get married in that time of trouble? I think that is a difficult question to answer. What I would say is, if circumstances allow, if providence permits, if there is sufficient time, then I have no information to tell somebody that it wouldn't be wise to do that. Would it be difficult? Yes. Would it be extremely difficult? Potentially. Will there be enough time for that to happen? Maybe there won't. Do we believe in hasty marriages? Certainly not. So, applying all the rules that we know, would it be sensible to do that? It may well be appropriate for 2 people to marry. It would depend upon many things. What I would not recommend is people who've never met, suddenly, if that period was 12 months, to marry at the beginning of that time period and say we better get married now because we've only got 12 months left, or whatever that number would be. I don't think we should abandon the rules of common sense, of propriety, all the rules that we know of relationships, just because we feel pressured due to time. If we took time out of that because we don't know how long that period would be, and we just took the difficulty of the time period, I see no reason, if people have the wherewithal to do so, that they could not or should not marry. So the person, after asking the question, then gives some defense or some argument of why they think it's wrong. So not only are they asking the question, but they're actually, from what I can see, he's actually building an argument of why they think it would be wrong to do that. They give a Bible quote and they give a Spirit prophecy quote. The Bible quote is 1 Corinthians chapter 7. 1 Corinthians 7 verses 28 and 29. 1 Corinthians 7, 28 and 29. Art thou bound unto a wife? Seek not to be loosed. Art thou loosed from a wife? Seek not a wife. But, and if thou marry, thou hast not sinned. And if a virgin marry, she hath not sinned. Nevertheless, such shall have trouble in the flesh, but I spare you. So, I guess it's really verse 27, which is the verse that I think that the person is referring to. It says, if you're not married, don't look to seek for a wife. And they're going to use that argument of Paul to say that perhaps we shouldn't marry. Now, the explanation of these verses, I don't have time to go into this week, but we may go into them in a later passage, these verses. So I'm just giving you the verses. I'm not going to respond to what Paul is dealing with and how we should address that one. But then the questioner gives a Spirit prophecy quote, and they go to Last Day Events 37.1. LDE 37.1, and this is taken from Testimonies to the Church, volume 5, page 366. And also to another passage, which is Testimony Treasures, volume 2, so 2TT, and this is page 124, paragraph 1. I think we did this last week, but I can't remember. I'll go through it again anyway. So, I read from Last Day Events. It says the following. In this age of the world, as the scenes of earth history are soon to close and we are about to enter upon the time of trouble such as never was, the fewer the marriages contracted, the better for all, both men and women. So this is a pretty emphatic Spirit prophecy quote that says we're nearing Jacob's time of trouble, which is the context of what this person is speaking about, Jacob's time of trouble. And Ellen White says, upon the time of trouble such as never was, this is Daniel 12, verses 1 to 3. Ellen White says, the fewer the marriages contracted, the better for all, both men and women. And it sounds like a really clear-cut, inspired statement that we shouldn't get married until you dig a little bit further into this passage. So I've given you the two references here, 5T and 2TT. So if you were to go to the 5T passage, this is actually chapter 42. This is chapter 42 from 5T. I'll give you the page where chapter 42 begins. And it's page 361. So it's 5 pages before. It begins in 361 and we're on 366. This is where that passage is taken. And I want to give you the title of chapter 42. It's Marriage with Unbelievers. Now this is a letter that Ellen White is going to write to Sister L. And she says, I've learned of your contemplated marriage with one who is not united with you in religious faith, and I fear you have not carefully weighed this important matter before taking a step which is to exert an influence upon all your future life. I urge you to give the subject careful and prayerful deliberation. Will this new relationship prove a source of true happiness? Will it be a help to you in your Christian life? Will it be pleasing to God? Will your example be a safe one for others to follow? She goes through all of this passage, page after page, And then she comes to page 366, paragraph 1. It says, in this age of the world, as the scenes of earth's history are soon to close and we are about to enter upon the time of trouble, the fewer the marriages contracted, the better for all, both men and women. Above all, when Satan is working with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, that's the unbelievers, let Christians beware of connecting themselves with these unbelievers. God has spoken. All who fear him will submit to his wise injunctions. Our feelings, impulses and affections must flow heavenward, not earthward, not in the low base channel of sensual thought and indulgence. It is time now that every soul should stand in the sight of a heart-searching God. So this passage that is taken from the Spirit of Prophecy, which people too often use to prove that we shouldn't marry as we approach Jacob's time of trouble, is actually a misunderstanding of what Ellen White's saying. Her point is that we should not be marrying unbelievers as we're approaching the end of the world. Someone asked a question last week, is it appropriate to basically introduce someone into the movement because I think the way they said it is because you fancy them, basically. You're attracted to the person, you want to marry them, so what you want to do is convert them into the movement so that you can marry. And this is an example of what is going on in this situation. We're approaching Jacob's time of trouble, and it's dangerous for Christians to get entangled in the world thinking that they can win the world to them, because essentially what will happen, the world will win them to themselves. If you go to the context of the other passage, which is Testimony Treasures Volume 2, page 124.1, this is again the same chapter title. It's called Marriage with Unbelievers. And now there's a subsection to this one, and the subsection is as in the days of Noah. So it's the same passage. These the less marriages, the better off everybody would be. And now this is in the context of the story of Noah, where we're told that people are marrying and giving in marriage. I'm hoping that we all know, when you go back to the book of Genesis and it speaks about marriage, it talks about men and women marrying. This is Genesis 6 verse 2. Genesis 6 verse 2, it says that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. We understand that the sons of God are believers in God, Christians we could call them, and that the daughters of men are the Gentiles. That's the phraseology that we would use today, or the world. So these are Christian marrying Gentiles or unbelievers, and it's this relationship that Ellen White is saying we should not do. Genesis chapter 6 brings you into the story of Noah. If you drop down to verse 6, when God sees what's happening, he repents of what he did, creating human beings. And then verse 8 says, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord, and he was just in his generation. And then it speaks about the situation there on the earth. And this is the context of when it talks about marrying and giving in marriage, when it comes to the story of Noah. So the context of whether or not we should be marrying as we approach Jacob's time of trouble, when you go to the Spirit of Prophecy, and Ellen White says the fewer the marriages, the better off everybody would be, she's talking about Christians marrying people in the world, Gentiles, non-Christians. Those marriages should not happen. And we should not be entering into relationships with people to try to draw them in to the movement, into our faith, because we are attracted to them. In another study, I'll go through 1 Corinthians 7 to try to show the context of what Paul is dealing with there, because people are using this as evidence to say, if you're single, remain single. Don't think about getting married. All I would say is that if you take the second part of the verse, it says, art thou loose from a wife, seek not a wife. That means if you've been married before, don't seek for remarriage. So that the subject in 1 Corinthians is not that straightforward, it's more complex. Is it okay for elders to do sanctified matchmaking, to introduce individuals, particularly who are in different continents, in this climate of sparsity of people? I think my simple answer is, I've addressed this already, is yes. I think it's appropriate for people of spiritual experience to, the question that says sanctified matchmaking. I guess without defining what matchmaking would look like, to introduce people that may be compatible one with another. I think there is a place for that if it's done in a sympathetic and in a good fashion. I have personally encouraged people to push forward in a relationship, at least to venture into it. I don't mean they've been encouraged to marry, but to take a first step where I have felt that there is the potential of them finding happiness one with another. I've had plenty of experiences where people have asked counsel, where they're interested in someone and they would ask an opinion on that. It can be dangerous, it can be hit and miss, and I would say to choose your counsellors carefully, because I know in very specific situations where people have received wrong counsel, and not just wrong counsel where people have said, yeah, go ahead. I know equally other situations where people have said not for couples to go forward, or for a person to try to develop a relationship with somebody, when I think actually that was actually really bad advice, because that relationship may have been a good relationship to get into. Just next question. How would the movement deal with a couple who have conceived a child out of wedlock? How did Jesus deal with Mary Magdalene? How did Jesus deal with Simon the Pharisee, Simon the leper? I don't know if people are aware of that story, but it was Simon, when we're talking about the Feast of Simon, where Mary Magdalene is there. It's Simon that actually first introduces Mary into her life of fornication, her life of ill repute. She was a woman of ill repute, and it's his corruption of her that started her down that journey. And I'm not saying they had a baby, but what I am saying is, in those days, if you got the reputation that you were not a virgin before you were married, you were doomed to an ugly future. And Simon had done this to Mary. He had destroyed her ability to be a normal woman in society there. I don't know the details of what he actually did to her, but he did lead her into a fornication, into prostitution. And the only point I raise about bringing that situation is, how did Christ deal with that couple? Not that they were a couple, but those people who had entered into fornication in some shape or form. They had their former lives wiped clean, and they were not held against them. So the question is, what does the movement do with a couple who have conceived a child out of wedlock? The question is specifically, would the counsel be to marry or to break up? Also, what would happen to their membership in the movement? So this question is not just about people who had the child out of wedlock, but it's talking about people who are in the movement and they've entered into a relationship. Maybe it was a courtship, maybe it was not even courtship, maybe they just got into a heated, intimate relationship with one another, got into a problem, slept with one another and had a child out of wedlock. What would the counsel be to that couple? It says, would the counsel be to marry or to break up? So the question is, when it says to break up what? Is the fact that two people have had sex and that act has produced life, a child, does that mean that they are in some way married? Does that mean that they have somehow have this relationship that may potentially be broken up? So I think the whole question is loaded about what marriage actually looks like and how it operates. And what I want to do, because this is connected to the previous question, is to state that sex in and of itself is not indicative or is not the marker that someone is married. It's part of a series of steps that two people take that cement their union, which we would call marriage, but it's not the defining mark to say that a couple is married or that they're not married. If it was, then if for some reason a couple got married and they were not ever able to have intercourse, that means that they were married. So the subject is much more complex than that. And whilst I don't want to go into all the details of this, because I think it would depend on so many issues about the details of the situation, I don't think it's easy to give these generic answers. I do want to say, just because people have had sex one with another, it doesn't mean that they're married. So I'd want to say that to begin with. I think if people have done something inappropriate in that way, that it doesn't mean that they should marry either. So I think that indiscretion doesn't mean that they should automatically marry just because they had had sex. Now the question is, this is not just them sleeping with one another. Now they've got a child, and what should they do with this child? And this is a much more complex answer than I think people probably envisage or consider. Now, we're in a Christian framework, and people have very strong opinions one way or the other on the subject of abortion, but the couple or the woman may decide that she would abort the child. That may be a decision that she would take. I don't think a decision like that should be taken lightly at all, and I think it would be wise for her to receive counselling, both within the movement, and I would suggest receiving professional counselling from people who are familiar with out of wedlock relationships. So I think people, whether you believe that to be right or wrong, whether I believe it would be right or wrong, that is something that people would consider, and I think that's just a matter of fact. So that's one thing that people would consider about having the child. Some people would consider adoption. Some people would say they'll have the child and the mother would look after the child. Any and every scenario, I think, has its own problems. Now, for each one of you, there are nigh on 100 people watching this presentation at the moment. Each of you perhaps would have their own perspective of what they would want to do, what they think is right and what they would think is wrong. But I would argue that any of these scenarios is not going to be a pretty picture. Whether it's adoption, whether it's abortion, whether it's the sister having the baby as a single parent. And the other one that obviously is being asked is if they should marry. And I'm going to say it this way, that they end up being forced to marry. Because this would then be a forced marriage. It wouldn't be a marriage that was based upon, I'm going to say equity or for the right reasons. This marriage now is being driven by the fact that there's a life, the life of the child, that is being introduced into this scenario, and therefore the couple would be, whatever word you want to substitute for being forced, and now being forced into, or funneled into this situation, into this relationship, because they think it's the right thing to do. And I would suggest that in a number of cases, perhaps many cases, that would not be the right decision to take, to marry someone because you had made a mistake and a child had been born out of that mistake, or a child was conceived. I don't think it's my place to tell people what the correct answer would be. It says, what counsel would I give? And I don't think I'm in a place to give counsel like that. I think they would need counsel from people in the movement, and I think they would also probably need, depending on what their options are, almost definitely professional secular counsel from those who have experience in these situations. And I don't think there is a right answer to any of this. What I have done is to be frank and candid about the various options that, if I say this couple could take. They could marry, they could remain separate, the sister could carry the child through pregnancy and keep the child as a single mother. She could then marry in the future if she found a worthy husband. She could adopt the child. She may consider abortion as an option for herself. Without me standing and judging her and her options, I would say that there is not a one-size-fits-all on this issue. And it says also what would happen to their membership in the movement. And again, I think it would be necessary to understand the situation of how things got to that stage before any decision was made about what would happen to these people. There are far too many stories, maybe you have heard, and I know I have heard and I have seen in the Adventist church, where young people in the church have got into these situations, and often, more often than not, the woman in that scenario has been the one that's been targeted, ostracized, criticized, and has borne the brunt of the shame and humiliation of what has happened to her, and has basically ended up being the one to be blamed about all those things that have gone wrong. So I don't think it's appropriate and correct or right for me in this kind of a forum to discuss what would happen to their membership. I think a lot more would need to be discussed about what happened. So if I can summarize, because this is an important question, I don't know if it affects somebody in real life right now who's listening. I don't know if this is a theoretical question, if they're asking for themselves or for someone else. Two people in the movement, whether they're in a courtship or not, make a mistake, they sleep with one another, and and they have a child, they conceive. What are their options? Is our counsel for them to marry or to break up? I'm saying there is no such counsel. It would need to be discussed and they would need to be helped to come to a decision for themselves. There is no one size fits all. Marrying, those two are the only options that people have given, marrying or breaking up, but each one of them has its own nuances. And marrying is not, in many of these situations, the ideal option or the only option available. So I just want to make that point clear. So some people have said absolutely, have seen it happen to a young woman here in this country, whatever country this person's from, and it's so refreshing to see. Okay, so they think the counsel that I'm saying is okay. What is the movement's official opinion in regard to abortion now that it has been brought up? I don't know what people mean, like the official opinion. If you want my opinion, I think every human being that's got cognitive ability has the freedom to decide what they want to do with their own bodies. It's not for me to tell somebody what they should be doing with their body. If that's what my thoughts are, and that's officially enough for people, I guess that's what my official position is. I don't know if people would want to consult with other officials in the movement. I don't have, that much power to, when I speak, that this is the official position of the movement on issues such as this. On prophetic issues, people may consider this. So I don't know if I consider an official position in regards to abortion, but my position is that we don't have a right to force people to do things against their conscience. The subject of the sanctity of life is a complex subject at the best of times, and I think people have interesting perspectives on this. It is a subject of Bible prophecy, as you all know, Roe versus Wade. I don't know if that means something to everybody. For at least 60-70% of the people watching this presentation at the moment, that does mean something to people. It's the legalization of abortion in the United States that happened a few decades ago, that overturned hundreds of years of basically the abuse of women. Subject of abortion is a really complex subject, but in so many ways, in too many ways, it really is not just about the sanctity of life or the life of the child. It really is about the abuse of women. And when we take it from the perspective of sexism, I think the whole subject takes on a different nature, a different characteristic, and we should tread very carefully about this particular subject in this movement, in this dispensation. So okay, I'll move on. How would the movement help a couple who is recovering from infidelity? Basically, that's adultery. So, a couple man and woman, let me rephrase that. A couple come together, so they're laughing at me here. A couple come together and they're married, and one of them commits adultery. That's what I understand is infidelity. It says recovering from infidelity, which I guess assumes that the injured party, if that's even the right way of saying it, has got to a place where they're saying they're prepared not to divorce. I want to go back a little way to last week's question and answer. Towards the end, I spent a fair amount of time, and I can't remember what the question was that I spent so much time on. Can't remember the specifics of the question, but it was really about the... Oh, I think I remember it. It was basically about touching and intimacy, etc. Again, why we couldn't do it pre-marriage. And we spoke about it in the context also of conflict resolution. So conflict resolution in the marriage, where husband and wife basically have had a fight, and that could be on multiple levels. I don't just mean a little tiff. Sometimes they're enormous issues, and too often couples want to fix this problem by sleeping with one another. And what I said was, without going into details, and someone has asked me to go through these steps, which I'm not going to do at the moment, I said, if there's a problem, you want to come to the solution or to fix it. And too often, sex becomes the number one way of dealing with this fixing this problem. We've had an argument, we've had a fight, so let's patch up the issue and we'll sleep with each other. That intimacy will kind of solve all the problems. Now, coming together as a couple like this, it can help, it can take the edge of things, but it really doesn't fix the problem. And what I said last week was that there are a number of steps that should be taken first, and then sex would come down here. In fact, I had sex at the bottom, but it really isn't the bottom, it really is the last one. There is at least one more step after sex, maybe even more, that sex is just a part of this solution. So if I could just say it simply, I'm going to do this in a really crude fashion. I'm going to just say talk. You need to talk before you act. And this is a very obviously basic overview of this thing. And the reason why I'm mentioning this again is what I want to say is when you have these problems and you start trying to fix the problems, the underlying or the foundational problem with all people, if this was the foundation on which to build a proper marriage. When we did this study on the nature of man back in 2017, I said something that I think is important to know. I think it's factually correct, but people found it provocative. And it's this. You will see over and over again in the Spirit of Prophecy, when Ellen White is talking about our Christianity, she says we're not supposed to base things on our emotions. We're supposed to base things on principle, on law, on right and wrong, not on emotions, not on feelings. And however correct Ellen White is on that position, and I'm not doubting that she is correct, my argument was back in 2017 is that this thing here, the whole thing, is a machine. If we can just think about a human being, mind, body, spirit, etc., is a machine. And this machine is driven by one thing. And the thing that it's driven by is not logic, and it's not driven by reason, it's driven by emotion. So this machine is basically an emotional machine. This is what drives everything about us. It's our emotions. And we can pretend that it isn't so. We can read the Spirit of Prophecy quote that says we're supposed to not consult feelings but work on principle, without properly understanding what Ellen White means when she says that. But I'm saying the reality is that we are driven by our feelings, our emotions. And the primary one that drives us is love. We are love seeking machines. We seek for love and we are driven to give love. I'll use another word attached to love, which is affection, because I think people don't really understand what love means. People will start saying, you know, the three different types of love in the Greek, or they'll say love is a law, or love is a principle, or God is love. There are many winds of doctrine now going in the movement about talking about what love is and who and what God is. A lot of misnomer about the subject of love, and a lot of misnomer about how relationships work and about how equality and respect works. And I'm saying the primary level is love. So when we talk about equality, it really is about giving and receiving of love. And I want to use another word which I've just said, which is affection. The biggest problem that people have in their relationships is that they do not know how to show affection one with another. They have problems in loving each other. So the question was, how does the movement help a couple who's recovering from infidelity? And what I want to say is, unless there is an unusual situation, the reason why adultery, they use the gentler word infidelity, the reason why adultery occurs in a movement, in a marriage, is not because one person is evil or one person is bad or something like that. Adultery is indicative of a complete and utter breakdown in a normal functioning relationship between two people. If I can say it this way, adultery occurs because both people in that partnership have failed one another. And that may be a very difficult and a very harsh thing for people to hear, especially if you're the wounded person in a situation like this. That I'm turning around and saying part and parcel of this is that you're to blame for your spouse committing adultery. Now, there are degrees and there are levels of blame. And I'm not saying that people are excused or there's a good reason why people have committed adultery. But the question that's asked is, how can the movement help? Not who is the movement going to accuse or blame. So I'm approaching this from I'm approaching the problem or this question. Could we turn our mics off? I'm approaching the problem from the perspective that the couple actually want help, not from the perspective of a divorce lawyer or to negotiate the terms condition of separation. I'm not trying to do that. If that's where the couple wanted to go, that would be, this discussion would be different. I would be talking about it in a different way. But the question is, how can we help them to recover? Which means that they want to remain together, they want to recover. That's what I'm assuming this is. Not how do we recover and get the best terms and conditions for divorce. We could talk about it differently if we wanted to do that. But if we're looking for recovery, then I think what we need to realise is that the couple both need to have affection and love shown and to be given to their spouse. It needs to be received and given. And the reason why couples or one of the people in the relationship ends up committing adultery is because their needs are not getting met. And if we could approach it from that perspective, I think we would begin to actually be able to bring reconciliation and to help support a couple that were willing to remain together and to get their marriage back on an even footing. It's recognizing that there has been a breakdown in the relationship between these two people because they are not showing one another the love and affection that they need. And this may seem obvious, but it's not. Most people don't understand how to love or how to receive love. Now, I was asked a question on this the other day, and I think actually one of the people that asked the question is probably here in the group. Maybe they're not. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But they asked, let me see if I can find the question, because I thought it was a good question. Oh, the question was, yes, how is pure, genuine love obtained? How do we obtain this love that this person needs to receive? So here it is, this cloud here, it's got love here, and this person needs to get this love for them to enable them to receive the love and give it to this person. Where does this person here, this husband, where does he get this love to give to his partner? Where does it come from? And unfortunately, I do say unfortunately, far too many of us think that this love that this person needs to receive to give to their spouse comes from God. They think God needs to put this love into their heart so that they can give it to someone. So that's why I put it as a cloud, because people think this love comes from God. So first of all, we need to love God, learn from Him, receive His love so we can give it. And I'm suggesting, according to the Epistle of John, that this is, as he says, not me, that this is a lie. It's a lie to believe that you're going to have to get this love from God in order to give it to somebody. That is just not true. And if you find that a difficult pill to swallow, I want to remind us that this relationship here is proxy. It's a proxy for our relationship with God. The natural or the physical teaches us about the spiritual. Our spiritual connection with God is taught to us through our physical connection with another human being. So we cannot get the spiritual, here it is, the spiritual, to teach us about the literal. This is why John says it's a lie. And we discussed this at length in Portugal earlier this year, the importance of understanding this concept, because conservative Adventists, people in this movement, have got this thing so wrong, so upside down, it is scary. It's scary to believe that the way you're going to fix your marriage is by becoming this super Christian, learning love from God so you can give it to your spouse. That is not how it works. And the reason why that it can be proved that way, I can prove this, and I communicated with my friend on this, is to ask, this is not a marriage, this is a parent, and this is a baby. And the question I asked was, this love that is being spoken about, this pure, genuine love, and I kind of asked what pure, genuine love means. And I kind of gave it a definition of pure, genuine love. If I can find where I gave pure, genuine love. Genuine means real, and pure means selfless. So this is real, selfless love. And I asked, what's the easiest relationship that you know of that speaks about a pure, selfless love? And it's the love that a parent gives to a child. It's completely selfless and it's real. And my question is, where did this parent get this love from? And every single one of us knows they didn't get it from God. This love that the parent has for the child is inbuilt within them. It surfaces as soon as the child is normally conceived, and then as it goes through the pregnancy and ends up being born into the world. This love is created, I'm going to just say, out of thin air, if I can say it that way. because it's inbuilt within the nature of a human being. We know that because you go to any atheist, any secular or any other religion, and they all have the same warmth and affection for their children as you and I do. So we know that this is true, that this love that two people have, these two spouses, is not created from God. It's already there inbuilt. And the problem is that we have been educated on this faulty premise. The parent gives the love to the child. It's all good and well. Now, does the child reciprocate the love back to the parent? No, it doesn't. The child's love for the parent is conditional. It's not pure and it's not selfless. There may be glimmers of that. There may be moments in all human relationships, there always are, where the child will give real selfless love back to the parent. But the vast majority of the time, it's neither real nor selfless. It's conditional and it's selfish. But it's this one-way street. Now, what we are normally trained to believe is that when you're a child, your parent owes you something. What does your parent owe you? It owes you real, selfless love or genuine, pure love. And ask a child, if the parent doesn't give it, the child will go crazy, and in a moment later they will commit the same crime that they accuse the parents of, and they basically have double standards. What happens when this child grows up into adulthood and now it marries? We train this child, when you get older, what you need to do is to develop this resilience, develop this mindset that you can handle life by yourself, that you need to manage your own affairs, that you don't need anybody. And this is the worst training that we can give to a child as he enters through childhood into youth into adulthood. This belief that when you become an adult, you're an island or you don't need people, you need to look after yourself, look after number one. It is a dangerous position to come into, because what happens is these adults now get trained that this desire, this need for love doesn't exist in adulthood, it only exists in childhood. And I'm saying this is the fundamental reason why marriages are not working properly, is because we are trained as from childhood, when we go into adulthood, that we do not deserve or we do not need love. You can have sex, you can sort of manage things together, and it all becomes a bit passionate, but we don't deserve true affection and true love. And too many couples are at that level. And what happens is, in a couple that are at the extreme end of this, one of them will eventually break down, try to seek for this love that they know that they need, even though they've been trained that they don't, and they end up committing infidelity. So I think my time's about up now, so I just want to finish by saying this thing. If we're talking to a couple and the couple, one of those people in the couple, one of the spouses has committed adultery, if the couple want to make a go of it, they don't want to divorce and separate, I think what they need to learn, what they need to be taught, is that this idea of both needing love and giving love as adults is essential to learn and to practice, and they haven't learned it and they haven't practiced it. And the reason why one of these couples has gone off and committed adultery is because their needs are not getting met by this person. And I'm not saying this person is the one to blame for this person's adultery. The problem is a lack of education. Neither of them understand how marriage is functioning, how marriage works. And people's insecurities, people's inability to trust their spouses is all built upon this idea that essentially we're trained, when we get into adulthood, we don't need people. But our human nature cannot deny itself. It cannot pretend to be some other kind of nature. And human nature demands one thing. It demands love, which we can call attention or affection. And if it doesn't receive it, it will wither and die. And in some people that are either crazy enough or brave enough, they will take all steps necessary to maintain safety or health or protection, depending on how you want to view it, which is basically they need to be loved. And what they'll end up doing is committing adultery. So from that perspective, I want us to see that adultery is not this sin, it's not this criminality, and I'm not saying it is not sin, don't misunderstand me, but what I'm saying in this context, adultery is a cry for help on the part of the spouse that has committed the adultery, that my needs are not getting met by you. And it's very difficult for this person who is the victim of this, who hasn't committed the adultery, to be able to get to a place to say, first of all, I can forgive you, because all of this person's safety, all of its protections has been stripped away from them. They're in this difficult place. Not only has that happened to it, now they're going to have to learn how to love this person and trust this person all over again. So it's extremely difficult. I'm not trying to pretend that it's easy, but if a couple are willing to go down this route, I would suggest that the act itself of adultery, particularly if it's not happened over, years or repeatedly, if it's a short-lived affair, can be handled, it can be managed. It tends not to be the thing that stops a couple from healing. What really stops a couple from healing is not being able to acknowledge the fact that both partners were complicit in this problem of not loving one another. And the reason why they don't love one another is because they've been trained not to. This person was a child. Both of them grew up and they were trained not to need love when they grow up. Their whole perspective of love is that it's weakness. It's weakness to rely upon someone. It's weakness for a man to cry, for example. It's weakness for a man to show affection. All of those things are all harmful, damaging and wrong. And it's this misunderstanding that what adults need primarily is love. And I'm saying the definition of love is not some crazy highfalutin Greek definition. And I'm not trying to say that to insult anybody. I want to say it's in the sense of affection. And all of us know what affection is. It's attention. Someone once said, when you're a child, you spell love this way. We tend to spell love this way as an adult, but for a child, love is spelled this way. T-I-M-E. Mm-hmm. And if you have children, or you're a child, if you're not a child, ask children, and this is what their definition of love. You can throw trinkets at them, whatever it is. You can bribe them all you want, but it will never get to a place where you have true love between the parent and the child. The only way that is ever created is by spending time with your children. And some people add at the front of this, Q time, quality time. So I don't want to make too much of this, but the way you show a child that you love them is by spending time. It's not by giving them things. It never is effective. In the short term, it's like a pleasure trap, but it really is a trap. It never does that. Children know what love looks like. They feel it. They sense it. But when we grow up, from childhood to adulthood, we're trained systematically by everything in society that we don't need love. Men use this crazy term, I don't know, depending, we've got people from different countries across the world, but in the UK they'll use this term called man up. You need to be a man, you need to be, take care of yourself, you need to handle yourself, stop showing your emotions, grow up. When you have a teenage boy that cries, you say, grow up, come on, don't behave like that. It's inculcated in people, particularly boys, to not expect to receive love when they grow up. And if you grow up not needing to receive love, you end up growing up not giving love because you don't see the importance of it. And love is affection. And most adults don't really know how to give affection. They don't know what it looks like. They don't know how it works. They don't know how to show emotions. And the reason why all this is so dangerous, particularly for us Adventists, Christians, is this. This is the person. This person says, I need love from you. And this person says, I'm not going to give you love. I don't know how to give love. I was never trained that way. And what does this person do? Does this person weep and cry and howl? No. What this person will do is say, well, I was trained that in my church that people are inherently evil, corrupt, sinners, not born again. So what else can I expect that I'm never going to get love from them? So you know what I will do? I will do what I was trained to do. I will look where? For my love. Heavenward. And then what they do is they reinforce this broken relationship and they turn to heaven to try to get solace and comfort and the love that they crave. And why will this not work? For the same reason why this wouldn't work. Is because what rule does this break? It breaks the rule of parable teaching. And that is just a theological argument, let alone the practicalities of this. Theologically, you cannot go to God to fulfill your need for love. It just cannot, will not work. It's a broken model. And that's why we as Christians are in greater danger than atheists. Because atheists can't turn up here. They've got nowhere to turn to. So an atheist will divorce and marry someone else. Divorce and remarriage is a better solution than going up to God. Because at least they know one thing. Please don't misunderstand that I'm not recommending adultery, divorce and remarriage. I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is at least these people in the world know how parables work because they're going to turn from this relationship and go in which direction? Horizontally to another person where there's a possibility that they can receive what they need. What they don't do is go up to heaven and break the rule of parable teaching. Because we're given these human relationships to understand how things work in a heavenly sphere. What this person needs to do is not find another person. What the person needs to do is not say, well, I'll just love God then because I'm married to a sinner. What the person needs to do is find out and understand the rules of relationships, which are all grounded on this one principle of love. And if you can do that, whether you're married to a saint or a sinner, and your spouse, this atheistic, world-loving person, and you're a faithful Adventist, it does not matter because you can both learn the language of love. And if you can do that, you can have a happy marriage and you can reconnect love how it's supposed to be, human to human. I'm saying this is why adultery occurs at its primary level. I'm not saying that there are not some evil, wicked people out there. There certainly are. There are philanderers, both men and women, who do bad things. I'm talking about normal people. This is the counsel that I would give to a couple that wanted to give their marriage another go, is to try to understand the mechanics and the laws of love and affection, and to try to deal with their relationship with each other, not break their relationship and isolate and essentially go to a nunnery or a monastery and basically have this one-way relationship with God and think that that's going to fix all of their problems. It won't. This is why God gave Eve, let me rephrase that. This is why God had Adam and Eve come together, because he knew that human beings need to connect one with another. And the connection between a human and God is just insufficient. Someone said this, you say that adultery is the result of a breakdown between the couple where the needs of the adulterous party were not being met. This is true, but is it always the case? Could it not be because the adulterous party has a pathology separate from anything their partner has or has not done? I think this is a important clarification. I don't know when that question was asked, but I did just make that clarification just a minute ago before I read that statement, that I'm saying this isn't a normal, I'm going to say normal relationship, normal people. There are people who are just philanderers. I don't know if that's a term that people use. They just are abusive. So I'm not talking about extremes of situations like that. Many of those people who have got either a mental condition or who are at the extremes of society, sometimes their situation is a result of this lifelong training. But I'm not speaking about that. I'm speaking about normal people, such as people in the movement, hopefully we're all normal, who have got themselves into a difficult situation. I'm talking about the vast majority of us who are in these difficult situations. Following one of your points, you mentioned, is it true that you have to be whole and one in Christ before you get married? No, I think that's a dangerous move to make, that you're one in Christ. If we had the opportunity, I'd get all of you, the 100 of you, and say, can we take a vote? How many of you assent right now that you're one in Christ? And that you're married to him right now? I don't know how many of you would be nervous to put your hands up, with certainty to say that, which means that none of you should ever be married or never can be married.
Weren't you saying you should be that to be baptised? Sorry, just to clarify.
Sorry?
Weren't you saying that you have to be in that position to be baptised?
Yes.
So we should all be able to say, everyone who's baptised should be able to put their hand up and say that.
Sure. But I'm saying, but the question is, I think, is that qualification to be married first? And I don't think that's a qualification for marriage.
Okay.
Yeah, I just don't think it's a qualification to marry someone, because if you took that position, everyone who's not a Christian and half the people that were Christians, their marriages are null and void now. And we just know that's just not correct, that's just not so. God doesn't even view it that way. Our relationship with Christ is not a prerequisite to marry first. It just really is not a prerequisite. Our relationship with Christ is a prerequisite for eternal life, which is a different subject, although it's related, of course, because it's related through parable teaching, through typology. I was going to say, I think I'm over time now.
Yes. Just giving you a time check.
So, I think that's a reasonable place to call an end to our study. Hopefully everybody's okay with that. We haven't finished with the questions. I'm hoping that I haven't caused too much consternation with people. People did ask questions on the chat Zoom. Again, as I said, I don't know how to get access to those questions. Maybe someone else knows how to do that and they can send them to Brother Leon or something, so that we can capture those questions. I hope it's been educational and a blessing. Lord willing, we should meet again next Sabbath at the same time, and it's been a blessing being with you all. Shall we close with prayer? Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for your goodness and mercy. Lord, I want to ask and pray that in our relationships one with another, whether it's parents and children, siblings, friends, but particularly husbands and wives, particularly those who are contemplating marriage, it's our hope and our prayer for those people that they would learn how to love one another, that they would love and learn to love each other in a way that would bring healing and peace and joy and fun to life. Lord, help each of us to realise that what we want the most, what we need the most, is to be loved. And if we all need to be loved, therefore we all need to learn how to give love. It's my hope and prayer that the brothers, the husbands amongst us in this study would learn how to take care of their wives now that the model of headship has been broken and become archaic. May they not choose to follow a route that is that can appear to be vindictive, that can be hurtful and humiliating. Lord, we know that equality is to be respectful, is to be kind and gentle, and it's to help and support those who need our help and support. Help each of us to learn this language, Father, the language of love. It's our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.